In the chaos of Nazi Germany's final days, one man slipped into the shadows, a man whose fingerprints were on both the Holocaust and Hitler's most advanced weapons projects. His name was Hans Kammler, an SS general, engineer, and one of the most elusive figures of the Third Reich. While top Nazis were being captured, killed, or taking their own lives, Kammler simply vanished. To many historians, Kammler represents the most dangerous kind of war criminal, not a raving ideologue or battlefield butcher, but a cold, calculating technocrat. He engineered death with blueprints and concrete, overseeing the construction of gas chambers and crematoria at Auschwitz and other extermination camps. Later, he became instrumental in Nazi Germany's race to build the V-2 rocket, a weapon of terror and the forerunner of modern missile technology. Yet unlike other top SS officers, Kammler was never held accountable. There was no public trial, no clear record of his death. Officially, he died by suicide in May 1945, but that explanation has been questioned for decades. Some believe he cut a deal with the Americans, offering them access to Nazi rocket technology in exchange for his life. Others suggest he escaped to South America or was quietly assassinated by former allies. This video traces the arc of Kammler's life, crimes, and vanishing act, from his rise through Nazi ranks to his murky disappearance and the haunting questions he left behind. Was he simply lost in the fog of war or deliberately erased? Hans Kammler was born on August 26, 1901, in Stettin, then part of the German Empire, now Szczecin, Poland. The son of a Prussian civil servant, he was raised in a culture of rigid order, obedience, and authority, qualities that would come to define both his personality and career. Following brief military service at the end of World War I, when Kammler pursued studies in civil engineering and architecture in Munich and Danzig. He earned his doctorate in engineering, specializing in large-scale construction projects. He was, by all accounts, a methodical and highly competent professional. In 1931, during the turbulent years of the Weimar Republic, Kammler joined both the Nazi Party and the Schutzstaffel, SS. At the time, these affiliations were still politically risky, but Kammler's early support of the Nazi movement would serve him well. By the time Hitler seized power in 1933, Kammler was already deeply embedded in the party's expanding bureaucracy. During the 1930s, Kammler worked in the Reich Ministry of the Interior, where he supervised urban planning and housing development. His organizational talents and hardline ideological alignment did not go unnoticed. He quickly attracted the attention of high-ranking Nazi officials and was recruited into the SS's Economic and Administrative Main Office, WWII, the branch responsible for managing the logistics of the concentration camp system. By 1940, Kammler was playing a key role in the construction of SS facilities, including camps and military installations. His engineering mind made him an ideal figure to translate Nazi ideology into physical structures of control, repression, and eventually mass extermination. He was instrumental in the expansion and systematization of several concentration camps, helping refine them into efficient machines of death. In 1942, Kammler was promoted to SS Gruppenführer, roughly equivalent to Major General, putting him near the top of the SS hierarchy. From that point on, he was not only an administrator, but an architect of genocide, applying his technical expertise to some of the most horrific crimes in human history. Hans Kammler's transition from engineer to war criminal became fully realized during his tenure as head of Amt C within the SS Wirtschafts- und Verwaltungshauptamt, WWII, the SS's Economic and Administrative Main Office. This department was responsible for construction and infrastructure across the SS network, including the design, expansion, and mechanization of Nazi concentration and extermination camps. One of Kammler's most infamous contributions was his involvement in the expansion of Auschwitz-Birkenau into a death factory. He oversaw the design and construction of gas chambers and crematoria, including Crematoria II and III, which became central to the mass extermination of Europe's Jews. Under his direction, the use of Zyklon B as a killing agent was standardized, and the crematoria were engineered to dispose of thousands of bodies per day. Kammler's office optimized the architecture of death, turning genocide into a process governed by blueprints, timetables, and capacity targets. Kammler did not merely sign off on plans. Testimonies and documents suggest he regularly visited construction sites and monitored progress personally. He pushed for greater efficiency in prisoner housing, camp layout, and labor allocation, all with the express goal of maximizing output and minimizing resistance. This output, of course, included the liquidation of human beings. Beyond Auschwitz, Kammler was involved in the construction and management of other key camps, including Majdanek and camps in occupied Poland. He helped design the underground tunnels at Mittelbau Dora, which would later become a forced labor site for rocket production. Even in settings not primarily designed for extermination, Kammler's approach was always brutally pragmatic. Human lives were expendable, and infrastructure existed to serve Nazi objectives at any cost. Kammler's role was unique in that he combined both ideological commitment and technical mastery. Unlike other SS officers, whose brutality was often impulsive or performative, Kammler's violence was bureaucratic and calculated. He represented the perfect fusion of engineering logic and genocidal policy, a man who could measure the success of mass murder in cubic meters and cost-efficiency ratios. His work blurred the lines between architecture and atrocity. Under his guidance, extermination became an engineered solution, and murder was reduced to a technical challenge. This mindset made Kammler one of the most dangerous figures in the Nazi hierarchy, not because he was loud or public, but because he was efficient, invisible, and indispensable. By 1944, he had risen to a level of influence that placed him at the center of both the Nazi war machine and its genocidal machinery. A man who quite literally built the Holocaust. As the tide of World War II turned against Nazi Germany, Hans Kammler's role shifted from the architecture of death camps to the architecture of desperation, the Nazi regime's last-ditch effort to deploy so-called Wunderwaffen, or miracle weapons. In 1944, he was appointed to oversee the V2 rocket program, effectively replacing Werner von Braun in operational authority. Even though von Braun remained the technical visionary, Kammler was tasked with managing both production and deployment, and he brought with him the same brutal efficiency he had demonstrated in the camps. The V2 rocket, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile, was a revolutionary weapon. It could strike without warning and was nearly impossible to intercept. Kammler ensured that production of the V2 was moved underground to protect it from Allied bombing. This led to the construction of the Mittelwerk facility inside the tunnels of the Kohnstein Mountain near the Mittelbau Dora concentration camp. Inmates from the camp were forced to build the rockets under horrific conditions. Starvation, disease, torture, and execution were routine. Kammler viewed human labor as expendable fuel. Thousands of prisoners died constructing these weapons. More people, in fact, died building the V2 than were killed by its impact, yet Kammler pressed on, focused solely on output. He frequently visited the underground factory, threatening workers and punishing delays. His management was not merely authoritarian, it was inhuman. By early 1945, Kammler's influence expanded again. Heinrich Himmler gave him authority over all of Germany's jet and rocket aircraft programs, including the Me-262. The world's first operational jet-powered fighter. Kammler was now one of the most powerful men in the crumbling Nazi military-industrial complex. He controlled secret weapons, advanced technology, and thousands of slave laborers. As Germany descended into ruin, he was one of the few individuals with both the technical knowledge and political access to influence the Reich's endgame strategy. There were even discussions, according to some post-war sources, about using Kammler's rocket systems to deliver chemical weapons, though these plans were never realized. Still, the convergence of genocide and cutting-edge science in Kammler's portfolio raises deeply disturbing questions about the ethical limits of technological advancement and how easily innovation can become an instrument of atrocity. By the final months of the war, Hans Kammler had become one of the most strategically significant and dangerous men in the Third Reich. He was no longer just a builder of death camps. He had become the custodian of Nazi Germany's last hope for survival, through terror and technology. By the spring of 1945, Hans Kammler had risen to unprecedented power within the collapsing Nazi regime. He oversaw secret weapons, commanded tens of thousands of slave laborers, and had direct access to top SS leadership, including Heinrich Himmler. Yet, as Germany faced inevitable defeat, Kammler disappeared, and what happened next remains one of the most enduring mysteries of World War II. The official account, accepted by a German court in the 1960s, claimed that Kammler died by suicide on May 9, 1945, near Prague. According to this version, he ordered his driver to dig a grave, then shot himself to avoid capture. However, this narrative is riddled with inconsistencies and lacks physical evidence. No body was ever recovered or positively identified, and the testimony relied largely on post-war statements from SS associates, hardly reliable sources. What complicates the matter further is that Kammler was too important simply to vanish unnoticed. He possessed intimate knowledge of the Nazi camp system, the V2 program, and other top-secret projects. Unlike many SS men who could be dismissed as expendable thugs, Kammler was a high-value asset. His disappearance raised alarms not just among Germans, but among Allied intelligence services as well. Over the decades, numerous alternative theories have emerged. One of the most persistent is that Kammler was captured by American forces, not killed, and secretly brought to the United States as part of Operation Paperclip, a program that recruited Nazi scientists and engineers for Cold War use. While this theory remains unproven, its plausibility is heightened by the fact that figures like Werner von Braun, Kammler's subordinate in the V2 program, were indeed relocated to the US and given prominent roles in NASA and defense work. Some researchers argue that Kammler, unlike von Braun, was too deeply implicated in war crimes to be used openly, so he was hidden in classified custody or quietly eliminated. In this version, the suicide story was a smokescreen. Others suggest Kammler escaped using the same rat lines that smuggled Nazis to South America, perhaps living under an assumed identity in Argentina or Chile. There is no definitive evidence for these claims, but the lack of a body, along with classified records that remain unreleased, fuels ongoing speculation. Adding to the intrigue are post-war intelligence reports, some declassified, others still redacted, that suggest U.S. authorities were actively tracking Kammler after May 1945. Several American officers involved in the V2 recovery operations in Germany reportedly referenced Kammler by name and expressed concern about his potential capture by the Soviets. Whether he was taken, protected, or quietly killed, Hans Kammler's disappearance was unlike any other top Nazi figure. He didn't die in the bunker like Hitler, hang at Nuremberg like Goering, or rot in exile like Eichmann. He simply vanished, taking with him secrets about genocide, weapons, and war that the world may never fully uncover. In the end, Hans Kammler didn't just help build the machinery of terror, he became part of its legend. His vanishing act blurred the line between history and conspiracy, leaving behind a haunting question. How does someone so dangerous just disappear? In the years following World War II, Allied intelligence agencies launched exhaustive efforts to locate and account for Nazi war criminals, and Hans Kammler was high on that list. His technical knowledge, deep involvement in mass murder, and sudden disappearance made him a figure of intense interest. Yet, unlike other captured SS officers or prominent scientists who defected to the West, Kammler remained an enigma. The U.S. Army's Counterintelligence Corps and British military authorities opened investigations into his possible whereabouts. Files uncovered in post-war decades suggest that Kammler was actively tracked, with mentions of his name appearing in documents tied to V2 rocket site recoveries and debriefings of former Nazi engineers. However, no arrest or definitive report of his death. The central problem was this: Kammler occupied a position at the crossroads of two of the most sensitive post-war priorities: Holocaust accountability and Cold War science. On one hand, he was a direct accomplice to genocide. On the other, he was the man who knew more than anyone about Nazi Germany's advanced weapons and underground production networks. His expertise, especially regarding the Mittelwerk facility and tunnel systems, would have been invaluable to either the United States or the Soviet Union. Some historians believe this dual identity complicated any official reckoning. It's possible that knowledge of his fate was deliberately obscured to protect intelligence interests, as was done with other former Nazis recruited under Operation Paperclip. Others argue that Kammler's potential value made him a liability, someone who needed to disappear completely, whether through assassination or deep state cover-up. Regardless of the truth, Kammler's vanishing had a chilling effect on how post-war justice was perceived. While Nuremberg delivered high-profile trials, the unresolved fate of figures like Kammler exposed the limitations of Allied efforts to fully document and punish the architects of Nazi crimes. His case remains a symbol of the compromises made in the aftermath of the war between justice and pragmatism, between moral outrage and geopolitical calculation. In a world still reeling from the Holocaust, Kammler's ghost served as a reminder that even the most monstrous figures can sometimes slip through the cracks of history. Hans Kammler's legacy is unlike that of most Nazi leaders. He left behind no impassioned speeches, no ideological manifestos, no dramatic courtroom appearances. Instead, his legacy is etched into the concrete of crematoria, the tunnels of rocket factories, and the faceless efficiency of bureaucratic genocide. He represents a terrifying archetype, the technocrat of mass murder. Kammler was not a monster in the traditional sense. He wasn't the kind of figure who shouted slogans or basked in the spotlight. He was worse. He was the man who sat quietly with blueprints and cost analyses, calculating the most efficient ways to kill human beings. His cold, methodical approach to genocide demonstrated how the tools of modernity, engineering, logistics, administration could be turned into instruments of horror. What makes Kammler especially disturbing is that his skills were transferable. The same tunnels that housed slave laborers for the V2 program could have easily served another war effort. His knowledge of rocket propulsion, jet aircraft, and underground manufacturing didn't die with the Reich. It was pursued, protected, and possibly even exploited by the victors of the war. Kammler reminds us that evil does not always wear a uniform soaked in blood. Sometimes it wears a suit, carries a clipboard, and calls itself a project manager. In a world where technology advances faster than ethics can keep pace, Kammler's story is a cautionary tale. It warns us of the dangers that arise when intelligence is severed from conscience, when innovation serves ideology rather than humanity. Hans Kammler's journey from civil engineer to SS general is a chilling reminder of how ordinary expertise can be weaponized by tyranny. He built the infrastructure of genocide and helped forge weapons of terror, only to vanish in the ruins of a dying regime. His disappearance leaves a shadow, not just over the historical record, but over our understanding of justice and accountability. The silence around his fate is not just a historical puzzle, it is a moral challenge. If the men who built the machinery of atrocity can vanish, what does that say about the world that let them?